My billionaire grandfather died on a Monday, 4 days later, while my family inherited houses, trusts, and investments. The lawyer slid one rusted key across the table to me. A rundown garage in Detroit. My father smiled. You got the trash because you are trash. I didn't argue. The next morning, he offered me $125,000 for the same garage he'd mocked. That was when humiliation turned into suspicion. So I spent the night there with a sleeping bag, coffee, and my toolbox, determined to inventory everything before selling. Near midnight, Grandpa's old workbench clicked. A hidden steel door opened, and what was behind it made me realize Dad had been wrong about the garage, but maybe not by accident at all. I wasn't the broke relative everyone had to rescue. That would have made my father's opinion easier to understand. I was 35, supervised reliability and maintenance at an industrial equipment plant outside Detroit, and made enough to pay my own bills, keep a little savings, and replace a transmission without calling anyone for help. What I didn't have was a corner office with Whitaker on the door. My older brother, Nathan, did. At 40, he was an executive vice president at Whitaker Industrial Systems, the company Grandpa Howard had built from a one-bay machine shop into a business worth hundreds of millions. Nathan wore tailored suits. I wore steel-toe boots. Dad understood one of those choices. He had never understood mine. When I was 23, he offered me a management track inside the family company. Good salary, connections, a future already mapped out. I turned it down. I want to know what I can build without our last name doing the work, I told him. Dad stared at me for a long time. Then don't complain when the world treats you like hired help. I never complained, but he never stopped reminding me. At family dinners, Nathan's promotions became announcements. My achievements became anecdotes. Nathan once joked, I build companies. Rachel fixes what companies buy. Everyone laughed. I laughed too. Grandpa didn't. Howard Whitaker was different with me. When I was 10, he put a carburetor on his old workbench and told me to find out why it wasn't working. I got frustrated after an hour and shoved it away. Grandpa slid it back. Never throw something away until you understand why it stopped working. That became our rule. For years, I spent Saturdays in his original Detroit garage learning engines, tools, and how to listen when a machine was telling you something was wrong. He never asked when I planned to catch up to Nathan. He never called my career small, which was why that rusted key hurt more than the money ever could. If Grandpa had left me the garage as a joke, then maybe Dad had been right about something I had spent my entire adult life refusing to believe. And that was exactly why I needed to see what was inside before I let anyone buy it. The meeting at Miriam Cole's office lasted less than an hour, but it managed to redraw the family hierarchy in ways everyone understood immediately. Dad received Grandpa's main residence and substantial trust assets. Nathan received additional company interests and investments. Then Miriam looked at me. To Rachel Whitaker. Howard leaves Whitaker Motor Works, together with all tangible personal property owned by him and located on the premises at the time of his death. Nathan glanced down at the appraisal summary. 92,000. Miriam nodded. As is value of the real estate, he gave a short laugh. Not cruel, just surprised. Dad was worse. When the meeting ended, he waited until Mom and Nathan were several steps ahead of us. Your grandfather left you the family trash. I kept walking. Maybe he finally understood where you belong. I stopped, meaning Dad looked directly at me. You got the trash because you are trash. I didn't answer. The next morning, he called. I'll give you $125,000 for the property. I actually pulled the phone away from my ear. You spent yesterday telling me it was worthless. It is. But Whitaker Industrial is assembling land in that district. I can absorb the parcel into the redevelopment and save you from replacing a roof that probably costs more than your truck. The offer was above appraisal. That should have made it easy. Instead, it bothered me. Dad never overpaid because he felt generous. Nathan called later and gave me the softer version. Take the money. Rach. Old industrial buildings are headaches, taxes, environmental inspections, structural repairs. Grandpa probably left it to you because you'd know what to do with the equipment. Maybe. But Miriam's wording stayed in my head. Not just the building, everything Grandpa owned inside it. So Saturday morning, I drove to Whitaker Motor Works with a toolbox, flashlight, thermos, camp cot, and sleeping bag. The forecast called for freezing rain, and I planned to work until I had a complete inventory. When I rolled up the metal door, stale oil and cold air rushed out. By sunset, I had found rusted parts, dead machinery, leaking ceiling panels, and enough dust to cover my boots gray. For the first time, Dad's offer started to look less insulting. It started to look smart. Then I found Grandpa's old workbench. Grandpa's workbench was shoved against the rear wall beneath a row of dented metal cabinets. I recognized it immediately. Same burn mark near the vise, same gouge where I had dropped a socket when I was 10, and bolted to the front edge was a small brass plate engraved with a date, June 14th, 2001. The day Grandpa let me start an engine I had rebuilt myself. I ran my thumb over the numbers. Something moved, not the plate. The entire section beneath it. I crouched and found 2 screws newer than everything around them. That made no sense. Grandpa hated replacing hardware unless he had a reason. I removed them. Behind the plate was a recessed steel lever. For several seconds, I just stared at it. Then I pulled. A heavy click came from somewhere behind the shelving. I stepped back. One entire rack shifted outward less than an inch. My pulse jumped. I grabbed the frame and pulled harder. The shelving rolled aside on concealed tracks. Behind it was a steel fire door. Not rusted, not abandoned, clean, sealed. I suddenly became very aware that I was alone in an empty industrial district at nearly midnight. I almost called Miriam. Instead, I looked at the keyring she had handed me. There were 2 keys. The first had opened the garage. The second was smaller. I slid it into the lock. Perfect fit. The mechanism turned with a deep metallic clunk. When I pulled the door open, cool, dry air washed across my face. Motion lights clicked on inside. One, then another, then another. I stopped breathing. The room stretched far deeper than I expected. Climate-controlled and spotless compared with the garage outside, and lined in 2 rows beneath fitted gray covers were cars, 9 of them. I walked toward the closest one like I was afraid the room might disappear. My hand caught the edge of the cover. I pulled. Dark green paint gleamed beneath the lights. I knew that car. Grandpa had a photograph of himself standing beside it in 1968, long before Whitaker Industrial had corporate jets or glass headquarters. I pulled the next cover, then another. By the 4th, my hands were shaking. At the far wall stood 3 filing cabinets labeled by VIN, titles, purchase records, restoration invoices, insurance documents, and sitting alone on a small metal desk was a cream envelope. My name was written across it in Grandpa's handwriting. Rachel. I opened it. The first line stopped me cold. If you're reading this, you looked before you sold. And suddenly Dad's $125,000 offer felt like the least important mystery in that garage. I didn't finish the letter that night. The first thing I did was lock the steel door, sit on Grandpa's old stool, and call Miriam. She answered on the 4th ring. Rachel, I found something. There was a pause. What kind of something? 9 cars. Another pause. This one was longer. By Monday morning, nobody was guessing anymore. Miriam arranged a formal inventory. Every VIN was photographed. Every title was checked against Grandpa's records. Nothing was moved until ownership, insurance, and estate paperwork were documented properly. Then Graham Pike arrived. He spent nearly 2 days in the rear bay. He barely spoke. He checked matching numbers, restoration histories, factory records, old purchase contracts. On the 2nd afternoon, he closed the final folder and looked at me. Conservatively, I nodded. About 18.6 million. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because my brain rejected the sentence. You're telling me there's almost $19 million sitting behind that wall? Graham shook his head. I'm telling you the collection could be worth around that in today's market. That does not mean you have $19 million in your checking account. That distinction became important very quickly. Specialty insurance, security, climate control, maintenance, building repairs. Dana Brooks, the financial advisor I hired. reviewed everything, and gave me the least glamorous version of suddenly inheriting rare cars. "You didn't inherit $18 million, she said. "You inherited $18 million worth of assets that cost money every day you keep them." Then I finally read Grandpa's letter. He wrote about Dad first. Daniel always wanted to know what something was worth. Nathan wanted to know whether it would appreciate. Then Grandpa wrote about me. He remembered me at 11 years old, sitting in that garage, asking which car he loved driving most, not which one was rarest, not which one cost the most, which one made him happiest. Then came the line I read 3 times. "I am not leaving you a museum. I am leaving you a choice." He told me I could sell them, restore them, drive them, keep them. He didn't want me trapped by his sentimentality. "Ownership isn't an order from a dead man," he wrote. That was when I understood. Grandpa hadn't hidden a treasure because he wanted to test whether I was good enough. He had simply trusted me to decide. That trust lasted about 4 days before Dad found out. Estate inventory made secrecy impossible. He arrived at the garage just before noon. I opened the front door. Dad walked past me, saw the steel door, saw the first row of cars, and stopped. For once. Daniel Whitaker had nothing to say. Then he asked the only question I should have expected. "How much?" "About 18.6. His entire expression changed. Those cars had been invisible to him until they acquired a number. He walked deeper into the room, staring at the collection. Then he turned back to me. "Rachel, these cars are Whitaker family history." I looked at him. "They were family history yesterday, too." His jaw tightened. "This is too much for you to manage, and just like that." I understood what came next. Dad wasn't interested in why Grandpa chose me. He was already figuring out how to undo it. Dad came back 2 weeks later with an offer. $10 million. For the garage, the land, and all 9 cars. I stared at the number longer than I wanted him to notice. $10 million was not insulting. It was the kind of money that could erase every practical problem in my life before lunch. No insurance worries, no roof repairs, no climate control bills, no wondering whether a 7-figure car had developed a leak while I was at work. Dana told me not to reject it just because Dad was the buyer. "Separate the man from the offer," she said, "then decide whether the offer makes sense." So I did. And it didn't. The collection had been appraised near $18.6 million before the property itself. Auction fees, taxes, and market risk mattered, but $10 million still priced my convenience more generously than my ownership. When I told Dad no, his patience disappeared. "Rachel, $10 million is more than you'll earn in 10 lifetimes." "Probably." "Then stop pretending you know this world." I looked at him. He continued. "You've spent your career fixing other people's machines. You don't belong on this side of ownership." There it was. Not financial advice. A verdict. Then you'll have to get used to the mistake. But rejecting Dad didn't solve the actual problem. Keeping 9 collector cars on my salary was ridiculous. So Graham identified the strongest candidates for sale. And Dana modeled the numbers. I chose 2 cars with high market demand and the weakest personal connection to Grandpa. They were sold through reputable channels, not overnight, not for $18 million cash. But the proceeds were enough to fund proper insurance, security upgrades, roof work, climate control maintenance, professional fees, and a long-term reserve for the 7 cars I kept. Nathan came by after hearing about the sales. "So you're liquidating everything?" 2. He blinked. "Why only 2? "Because that's what I need to sell." He looked around the garage as if that answer surprised him more than the collection had. The bigger surprise came 3 days later. A surveyor I hired to plan drainage work asked whether I knew Whitaker Industrial owned most of the adjoining parcels. I didn't. He pulled up the redevelopment plan. The company's preferred truck entrance ran directly along one edge of my property. Without that strip, the project could still move forward. But they would need to redesign the access route, renegotiate another parcel, and likely delay permitting. Suddenly, Dad's first offer made sense. The $125,000 had come before anyone knew about the cars. He hadn't been trying to save me from a worthless garage. He had wanted the land. I drove to his office that afternoon. You knew this parcel mattered. Dad didn't even pretend otherwise. I offered you above appraisal, without telling me why. His expression hardened. That's business. I nodded. Then stop calling it family when you want me to accept the bad side of the deal, for once. He had no quick answer. And I already knew what I was going to do next. I wasn't going to block his project. I was going to make him negotiate with me. The meeting happened at Whitaker Motor Works. Dad expected an acquisition discussion. I made sure it wasn't one. Dana sat beside me at Grandpa's old workbench. Miriam had the easement documents in front of her. Nathan stood near the door with Whitaker Industrial's development manager, looking uncomfortable before anyone had said a word. Dad dropped a purchase agreement onto the table. I increased the offer. I didn't open it. I'm not selling the garage. His face tightened. Then why are we here? I slid my own document toward him. Because your project needs access along the east side of my property. He looked down. A 30-foot easement. The company could build and maintain the truck entrance it wanted. I would keep the land, keep the building, keep the collection. Whitaker Industrial would pay fair compensation, plus the surveying, drainage, paving, engineering, and legal costs connected to the access. Dad stared at the pages. You're making your own family negotiate with you over 30 feet of pavement. I almost laughed. You taught me ownership matters. I'm finally applying the lesson to something I own. This is Grandpa's company. And this is Grandpa's garage. Nathan took the proposal and read through it. Dad looked at him. Tell her this is ridiculous. Nathan kept reading. It isn't. Dad's head snapped toward him. She's charging us. Nathan set the papers down. We would pay anyone else. The room went still. That landed harder than anything I could have said. Dad turned back to me. You're using this building to make a point. No. If I wanted to make a point, I could refuse access and force you to redesign. I tapped the agreement. I'm giving the company the route it wants at terms my advisors say are reasonable. He stared at me for a long time. Then his eyes moved toward the restored cars, visible through the open rear door. Your grandfather never meant for this place to come between us. You called it trash until you wanted something inside it. Then I found out you wanted the land before you even knew about the cars. Dad looked away. Eventually, Whitaker Industrial accepted the easement. The project moved forward. I kept the garage. Nothing collapsed. Nobody went bankrupt. The only thing Dad lost was the ability to assume that if he wanted something from me, I would eventually hand it over. A few months later, workers removed the faded Whitaker Motor Works 1962 sign from the brick facade. Not to throw it away, to restore it. 10 months later, Whitaker Motor Works still looked like a garage. That mattered to me. The brick had been repaired. The roof no longer leaked. The old sign was back above the door. Inside, 7 of Grandpa's cars remained. The front bays became a working restoration space, and I started bringing in a few young technicians on weekends to learn the things Grandpa once taught me. Nathan visited one Saturday. He stopped beside a silver coupe and asked, "What's this one worth?" Then he caught himself. Actually? Why did Grandpa keep this one? I smiled. That was progress. Dad came alone a few weeks later. He stood beside Grandpa's workbench for a long time. You're really keeping this place? Yeah. Even knowing what someone would pay for it, I looked at him. That's still the first question you ask. He didn't answer. And for once, I didn't need him to. My father knew the price of everything Grandpa built. Grandpa left me the one part of his fortune he hoped someone would still know how to value. If you were in my place, would you have sold the garage and walked away with the money? Or kept the one thing your family never understood? Tell me what you would have done, and if this story stayed with you, like, subscribe, and come back for the next one.